Take your career to the next level. The University of South Florida, St. Petersburg is offering a master's degree in digital journalism and design. Do the entire program from home and complete it in as little as 1 year. For more information, email journalism@usf.edu or call 727-873-4544. The cost is reasonable. The experience is invaluable.
Hey, everybody, if you like this podcast, can I ask you a favor? I'd love to make sure you also subscribe to the Poynter Report newsletter, where I bring you the latest news and commentary about the media industry every weekday. If you're already signed up, thanks a lot. But you should also check out some of the other great newsletters we have at poynter.org/newsletters. My colleague, Kristen Hare, focuses on the local news scene in communities all across the country every Wednesday with Local Edition. My editor, Ren LaForme, gives you the roundup of the best media stories from Poynter every Friday in his Open Tabs newsletter. And if you care about misinformation, fact-checking, getting to the truth, the Factually newsletter has you covered. And if you're looking for some great ways to improve your skills in writing, leadership, or ethics, our weekly training digest has you covered. Just go to poynter.org/newsletters and sign up today.
From the worldwide leader in journalism, truth, and democracy, this is the Poynter Report Podcast, a joint production between the Poynter Institute and the Department of Journalism and Digital Communication at the University of South Florida, St. Petersburg. Now here's your host from the Poynter Institute, Tom Jones.
Hey, everybody, thanks for joining us. Artificial intelligence and journalism. That's what we're talking about today. And should we embrace it? Should we be scared of it? Why do so many of us hate it? How can we use it the right way? No one better to help me talk about this topic than Alex Mahadevan, my Poynter colleague. He's the director of MediaWise's, which is the Poynter digital media literacy project that teaches people of all ages how to spot misinformation online. He's one of the co-authors of Poynter's first ever AI ethics guide. And he's my go-to guy whenever I have a question about AI and journalism, a topic that seems to be changing by the minute. Alex, thanks so much for joining me. I did ask ChatGTP to give me an introduction for you. It was okay. I thought I did better. So there's still some things that humans can do better when it comes to AI and journalism, but that's changing. So let's start here, Alex. We were talking about this at lunch the other day. We were talking about what we're going to talk about on this podcast. And it seems like when it comes to journalism and AI, people sort of fall into two categories. They either, for the most part, either hate it or they're scared to death of it. So why do we hate AI? Why are we scared of it if you're in journalism?
Well, I think part of it is the overwhelmingly negative coverage of AI. I mean, over the last 5 years, back to my time when I first came to Poynter in 2019, the big fear was around deepfakes, which are like AI-generated avatars of famous people, celebrities. And so I think there's been a lot of negative coverage around it. People are always really skeptical about these large tech companies and what they've done in the past to journalism. The AI tools themselves are trained, like how they come up with answers. A lot of it is based on journalism that's been done, books that have been written, research papers. So I definitely I empathize with journalists who are scared of the technology because it's like what we've been programmed to be scared of. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But it's clearly here to stay, right? I mean, it's not going anywhere.
Yeah, there was a time, a real brief moment, during the deepfake panic of 2018, 2019. And then, as ChatGPT came out, I played around with it and, it was useful, but it was still really, really stupid. And, part of me saw all this money flowing into AI and it reminded me of Bitcoin. It reminded me of a lot of the past kind of tech bubbles that we've seen. But over the last, 2 years, less than 2 years, we've seen so much advancement in these tools. We've seen a lot of adoption with these tools. I mean, you talk to anyone in the street. I mean, I was at the airport the other day and I looked behind me and a woman who was probably in her 60s. She's just spent the entire half hour on ChatGPT. And I'm just like, okay, this thing is actually here to stay.
It's funny. I know I might know somebody in my house that I share a marriage with who uses ChatGPT the other day recently to help her come up with it's sort of a project that they're working on, and it saved her a bunch of time when it came. Now, obviously, it wasn't a project it's a little different in journalism. We'll get into the journalism part of it, but it's a real time saver, and it can be a real time saver for people as long as it's used responsibly, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And the idea of it being a time saver and doing the tasks that we don't want to do, that's the other reason that I think journalists and editors have been a little bit worried is the ultimate goal to replace people, because it can do a lot of things. It can write a lot of content. It can generate a ton of content. It can do a lot of things that journalists do. But the thing about these tools is, like I said, they're really stupid. They cannot write well. I run the MediaWise Teen Fact Checking Network. Since 2019, I've been working on the TFCN, and so I've edited a lot of teenagers' copy, and it reminds me of teenagers' copy a lot of times. It's like it's not great, But in terms of like doing the things that a journalist would be too bored to do.
Right.
Not necessarily bored, but like things that take a long time. So sifting through 1,000 PDFs with early AI tools in 2018, 2019, they could do it. It took a long time, and it wasn't, always accurate. You had to double check a lot of things, which you still kind of do, but the tools can do those types of things a lot better. They can transcribe interviews. Everyone I know uses Otter AI. It's an AI tool,
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like Otter, to me, it was like the greatest thing ever. It's the one thing that as a journalist that I hate. I think I hate it more than anything in the business is transcribing interviews, and to be able to do it, have AI do it for me. And I mean, seriously, it literally will save 2 hours if I have like an hour interview with somebody to transcribe it. We'll get into more of some of the things that AI can do that journalists use it for. But you just mentioned a minute ago, you've been at MediaWise for a while now. And I've known you for a while. I've actually known your wife longer. She's a reporter at an editor at the Tampa Bay Times. We worked together. And so I didn't realize how you actually got involved in covering AI and became somewhat of an authority at the Poynter Institute. And I found out yesterday we were having lunch. Tell me again, like how you actually got involved with covering AI and studying AI.
So for some background, where I came from. So my background isn't in journalism; it's in economics. So I use technology a lot of coding. Almost got my PhD. And then when I went into newspapers, I went into weeklies, and I was always the youngest person in the newsroom. And so anytime a new technology would come around, they kind of toss it to me and be like, "Okay, Alex, you figure out what the heck you're going to do with this." So during the pivot to video era, they gave me an old JVC camera, and I had to walk around I did 2 videos a day at one point. And so I've always been really interested in emerging technology and how, it intersects with journalism. But particularly when it came to AI, I was scared of it. I was freaked out because I saw deepfakes. And then when I started playing with ChatGPT when it came out in November of 22, I saw how quickly it could create content, which means a bad person can create a lot of stuff very quickly. And so the first thing I did is I started creating fake news websites because that's what I did. That's how I taught media literacy. I would show teenagers, older adults, anyone we were teaching, here's the tools, here's what bad people can do, and here's why you need to be really vigilant online. So I played around with these tools a lot. I spent a lot of time creating really bad stuff with them. But along the way, I also realized how powerful these tools were. And what ended up happening is somebody came to Poynter and was like, "Hey, we hear about all this AI stuff. Do you do any training on that?" And I think it was just like, "Oh, Alex has been playing around with ChatGPT, so put something together." And so I put together an AI tool training curriculum at the time, and I've had a lot of fun. I mean, I really enjoy playing around and studying what these tools can do.
You mentioned it just a moment ago, like sort of the thing that got you started on this, and you being the director of MediaWise, it's about spotting misinformation or spotting issues online. We saw something recently in the news, for example, with the protests in Los Angeles with the immigration raids, where there were still deep fakes. There were still people using AI to produce videos for political reasons. I think that's one of the things that people are scared about, at least audiences. Like when I look at some of this stuff, I think I'm fairly, I'm not as much of an expert as you are on this, but sometimes I'll look at something, I'm like, wait a minute, is this real? How are audiences, do you feel like, embracing this stuff or looking at this stuff? There's a real skepticism, right? Still, or no? I mean, clearly these tools are effective if you want to fake people out.
Yeah, this is herein lies the challenge that we have in journalism and putting these tools to use. Is people hate AI. They really do. I saw this AI video that started spreading. It was a fake broadcaster, or it was a fake creator who was interviewing fake protesters. It was all AI. It was generated with AI. And it went viral. And, the guy commented under and said, it is AI, but this could actually happen. And you know what I mean? I'm like, so I think people are kind of filling this vacuum online where people want to see, what they want to see. And they're, so people are seeing a lot of AI generated content online, but people are repulsed by it. Look at your Facebook feed. It's filled with AI slop. Some of the great reporting nowadays has been around the AI slop that is filling everything. Google results, what you see on all your social media platforms. My Instagram, half of it when I scroll is AI generated videos, AI memes, et cetera, et cetera. Plus, general people, news consumers have been subjected to the same negative coverage of AI. So they might use, and this is like an interesting paradox, because people might use ChatGPT all the time, but they don't want you using it. They don't want journalists using it because they feel duped. They know how much easier it makes things. They see it as a shortcut. So when a journalist uses AI, that they see that as cheating, and it makes them uncomfortable, makes them anxious.
Yeah, you mentioned paradox, and I want you to talk about it. This was something that I hadn't really realized much about. So when there are some journalists who will use AI and some news organizations that will use AI. And the big thing is, as long as you let people know, as long as you let readers know, hey, we used AI in putting together this story, either through collecting data or whatever the case may be, or going through legal documents or whatever. And we think we're doing the right thing as journalists. Like, hey, we're letting you know that we're using AI. But in some ways, I won't say it backfires, but there is a pushback from audience when you let them know that you're using AI, right?
Yeah, like we've been talking about, these tools can turn any journalist into a data journalist. It makes us, it gives us the power to do more impactful work, reach more people. So there's a lot of promise there. But, when you use AI, what we've been saying from the very beginning at Poynter, when I did my first session in January of 2023, the first thing I said is, you got to be transparent. Audiences want to know when when you've used AI. And this was something I picked up anecdotally. Working in media literacy, you talk to a lot of news consumers and citizens, non-journalists, and that's what they were all saying. There's been more research since then. So Poynter has been big on disclosures and transparency since 2023. But some great work has been done by academics, Felix Simon and Ben Toft, who found that the more transparent you are about your AI use, that people trust it less. So you use AI and you use the best practices and disclosures. You're very specific. I used AI to sift through these PDFs so I could bring you a good, impactful investigation into what your local bank is doing, and here's how I did it. That person might get a lot out of that story, but they also might not read it because they don't trust you, So they've started calling it the disclosure paradox, and it's still persistent. It really is still an issue.
Just to play devil's advocate and tell me why this is important, we don't do this, is if I'm a news organization, I'm saying, wait a minute, people might read this story and might believe it, but as soon as we disclose that we used AI in it, then they might believe it less or not even engage with it. So if I double check it and make sure everything's good, should I disclose it? Why should you disclose it still? I mean, can you make that argument? Can you make the argument? Like, we know it's to be true. So
no, you make a good point. I mean, interns, I love interns. So don't take this the wrong way, but like interns will make mistakes all the time. You catch them in the editing process. Do you put at the end of, when you publish that story, this story was written by an intern who can make mistakes, which is what we generally do with AI. This tool was created with generative AI, which can hallucinate or spread falsehoods. But you make a really, really good point. And, I was talking to some Gannett reporters, and Gannett, does this, these key points that are generated with AI. And so they finish writing a story in the CMS. They create these AI key points at the top, the summary of the article. And under the summary, it says this was generated with AI. And these reporters were like, well, hold on a second, I'm rewriting half of these, I'm rewriting pretty much the whole thing. So why are you putting an AI disclosure on this? And I got to say, I'm starting to get a little bit more cynical about it. I mean, there is a ton of money being poured into, figuring out disclosures. And I am a little concerned that in a year, it's not going to matter. Are we... Think about all of the technological changes that have happened in journalism. I mean, do we still disclose when we use, spell check in Microsoft Word, which is something that does assist, and in my experience, does make mistakes sometimes, does screw things up. So
absolutely, yeah, and there's a lot of stories, magazine stories that have fact checkers. They don't list every single fact checker on a story, or somebody who or editors who insert maybe a mistake or not a mistake into a story. So I think that's one of the areas where I can see where it leads to more distrust from audience members. Hey, before we go any further, thanks so much for listening to the podcast. If you're enjoying this conversation, give us a good rating on Apple and Spotify. And if you're watching us on YouTube, please give us a like, subscribe. It really helps out a lot. Alex, I think one of the great fears, at least for journalists, when it comes to AI, is that because it can be so efficient and do so much, that eventually it is going to take jobs away. You talked about a moment ago about how everybody can become a data journalist with the use of AI tools. Does it get to a point, okay, we no longer need data journalists? I mean, how much, is the fear legitimate that AI eventually will take away jobs from journalists?
I don't see it that way. I think the newsroom of the future is going to look very different. Like I do think that jobs now may not be there in the future, but I think anyone who is a journalist, which is like anyone who works in a newsroom, you're doing journalism. Anyone who does journalism is going to be safe as long as they double down on the skills that make them really good journalists, which is being able to talk to, engage with people, to have that sense of where the story is and
develop
what matters.
Sources. That's
exactly develop sources. So I think the fear of job replacement is a little overblown. I mean, you yourself, we were talking about the skills that were going to be most important in the future, and you said writing, and I think there's a lot to that, because I think people still they may not want to necessarily read articles, but they want to listen to like an engaging story, and I think there's a lot to be said about this move to creators. Young people in particular are moving to creators to get their news, and the reason they're doing it is because creators are engaging and they're authentic. AI is not authentic. AI spits out the crappiest copy, like I said, the most run-of-the-mill, boring slop. And so when I think of like how people are engaging with creators, that gives me hope about journalism, because I still think people are going to be craving that human connection, something that a human journalist can bring to it that AI just cannot.
Yeah, I think one of the stories I'm reminded of, and again, this is going back a little bit of a way, so I mean, things may be evolving. There was a newspaper chain that I think tried to use AI to write like high school stories, high school sports stories, and as soon as they came out, they were just killed for it, because the stories were so, as you said, they weren't very good. Another issue, and I wrote about this for my newsletter, the Poynter Report. Recently, this happened. Now, it didn't happen in the newsroom. It happened with a supplement. In other words, it was an advertising supplement that goes into a paper, but it appeared in the Chicago Sun-Times and the Philadelphia Inquirer, where they were putting together, this is something you see very often in newspapers, a summer reading list. Like it's something for the audience to look at and say, hey, if you're looking for books to read this summer, here's our suggestion of 10 books you can read. And it developed this list. They used AI to put this list together. The issue was it had real authors, but some of the books weren't real. They were completely made up books. And it turned out that the person who was in charge of it didn't double check it. They admitted they were wrong. But this was it ended up looking bad for the newspapers, even though the newsroom had nothing to do with it. So this is as effective as AI can be about some things. This is still one of the big issues, Alex, right? I mean, you still need, if you're going to use it, you still need humans to come behind it and make sure that everything is correct and actually reads okay.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of the core principles in our Poynter's AI ethics guide is human in the loop. There has to be a human involved everywhere. You know what I mean. And this is an example of it's so frustrating what happened with this story, because this kind of thing is a slam dunk for AI. It is a large special section, which I have experience putting together special sections on my own, and it is not a fun thing to do.
Usually very limited staff, like maybe in this case, maybe one guy was doing it.
One guy, and he was not on staff. He was a freelancer, and so it could have been a slam dunk because it's a way to generate a lot of content, and generate like engaging things, of this nature. But he didn't double check his work, which is like, this is not a problem of the AI tools. This is a problem of AI literacy. The tools hallucinate. They are always going to. They are not fact machines. They're prediction engines. They're supposed to, when he gave it the prompt to get those books, the AI was trying to guess what books his audience would like. And it decided that a lot of those titles that it came up with would be engaging, which might be if they were real books. But that's
what I'm waiting for. I'm waiting for somebody, one of the authors of those say, hey, you know what? That actually would be a really good book. I'm going to go back. Maybe they were just ahead. Maybe AI was just ahead of the game. Like, this will be a book. Maybe not this summer, but in a future summer.
It could be. It could be. And that's, Indicator, a new digital outlet, just found that there were like hundreds and hundreds of AI generated books on Amazon that were just awful. So, that is an issue. But this identified a few problems for me. One, that people are not as AI literate as I think they should be when they use these tools, and there is not enough thinking about like how AI ethics should extend to freelancers, should extend to product teams, that should extend to other parts of the newsroom. So this was like a big example of like, this is why you need to be teaching AI ethics, because that's the first thing you learn is that you double check everything.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Let me throw something out at you and see how you feel about this. I thought one of the areas where people are so afraid of AI and how it's going to be used in journalism, and I thought, okay, let me give you an example of, say you're a media business reporter and you write stories about the media industry, and like the stories that I think most media business people hate to write are these quarterly earnings reports. Like the New York Times has a quarterly earnings call where they just spit out their numbers. Here's what our advertising was in the first quarter compared to last year, and here's where our subscription numbers are. You could make a case that as a journalist, like, I'll have AI write that story. I'll double check it to make sure everything's fine, but it can pump out that story in minutes compared to in seconds actually, compared to what I could do with it. The time that I save not writing that story, I can be doing an in-depth story. Like, let's just say the New York Times, the AI cranks out the earnings call story. Meanwhile, I'm working on a big story about their coverage on Gaza, or a big profile on their executive editor, say, or their publisher or something like that. Does it make sense? I mean, can you see a scenario where, like, okay, we can start using it for things like city council meetings, things that just are spitting out numbers and so forth?
News briefs. I mean, every week, when I was working at the weekly, at the very end, I spent all the time, like in a weekly, you file a lot of your, because I was a lazy kid. I was in my early 20s. You file a lot of your stories at the very last minute. And these are long stories because it's the weekly. And then the last thing you got to do is write the news briefs. You got to do the cops roundup. You got to do all of these like little rote things that are based on data. They are based on data. Like the news briefs were based on unemployment that came out about the metro area. You know what I mean? And so that is a great example of, thinking about what the audience gets out of what you are creating. Does someone come to a story about an earnings report and want a 3-graph flowery lead about, what it felt like, when the bell rung, that day, on the market? They don't. They come for very specific information. They come for the data. So, you can replace a lot of the rote reporting that the audience doesn't want that kind of like color for. And then you can spend more time putting your resources into stuff that the audience does want color for, and I think that is one of the big promises is in the news production side of things.
I can almost feel journalists like reaching through the camera and pulling my hair out by saying, wait a minute, you're not suggesting like cop reports should be done, because that's obviously based on information provided by the police. But so we're not talking about maybe necessarily like crime stories or things like that, but like, again, earnings reports.
Yeah. And I was just kind of throwing out like the rote things that I would do at the end. But you bring up a good point about these cops reports, and it brings up a good point about the limitation of these tools. So these AI tools are trained on so they have learned, the answer you get is based on years and years of data that is sucked up, of articles that is sucked up. So particular cops reports do seem like it's the easiest thing for AI to do, because you've got a report, it's got names, it's structured. Why not use it for that? But here's the thing, the bias within these systems. Poynter, particularly, and Kelly McBride, one of my colleagues, has spent a long time trying to change how we cover crime, to make it more equitable, to make it more ethical, to make it more empathetic. And so if you start using these tools that are trained by old bad reporting to generate crime stories, you're going to get the same old crappy bad crime stories. So that is a great example to bring up of these systems also have an inherent bias that comes out in their training data. So all of the work we've done over the last 10 years to try to change how we report on communities and do our jobs better. If you're relying on AI to spit out an entire story about, a community event or anything, you are bringing those old biases back into the picture.
You mentioned the ethics report. Poynter, you're one of the co-authors of Poynter's first ever AI ethics guide. Tell me how that came about, and what else is Poynter doing? What else are you doing to sort of try to stay ahead in this field that seems to be changing? Like, it's different now than when we started this conversation, probably. Yeah,
well, in 22, 23, the focus was on what can you do with these tools? Here's how to generate 10 SEO headlines. Here's how to generate alt text for an image. Like, it was very tool based. But what I realized is I was going to newsrooms and I was going to press associations, and they were like, this is all good, but are we allowed to use it? And it was like a really good point, and so we are lucky at Poynter, where we have the Craig Newmark Center for Ethics and Leadership. Like, we literally have an ethicist on staff, Kelly McBride, who I mentioned. And so we knew right away the only way newsrooms are going to be able to start experimenting with these AI tools responsibly and comfortably, is having some sort of guardrails in place, because these are new tools. It was kind of like, feels like the Wild West a little bit with these tools coming out every other day. So we worked for a while to come up with a set of principles, a template that any newsroom can adapt to guide their AI use. And it's built around transparency. Like I mentioned, since 2023, I was, working with newsrooms on how to disclose how they're using AI, how to get over the biases in the systems, how to use, the good uses, the bad uses, where to draw the line. Think about image generation. You don't ever want to be generating images to use for the most part. So we were kind of trying to help newsrooms navigate this new technology and what should be allowed. And the cool thing about what we did at Poynter is it was all based on like audience research. So we did, a big study, focus groups with the University of Minnesota, Ben Toff, I mentioned, to find out how audiences feel about AI. That helped guide our disclosure, work and our ethics work and our transparency work. We just did another follow-up large-scale study, on how audiences feel about AI. So what I love about what Poynter has provided to newsrooms is audience-based ethics guides. So here's how to use AI responsibly that is going to actually provide value to your readers and not freak them out.
Right. What do you think the industry, Alex, is like? Who are we looking toward? Are we like waiting for like the New York Times or the Washington Post to go all in? Like, we're going to fully embrace this. It's going to generate stories for us. Like, do you get a sense of where the news industry is in terms of like how all in they're going to be on this, or if they're going to be all in at all?
I think at this point, they're pretty much all in. with a caveat to a certain extent. I remember being at AEJMC, a conference for journalism academics, and I remember asking this question, and I was like, it seems like there's this like everyone's on the brink of using AI publicly. This was back when people weren't using it for summaries. They weren't making chatbots or anything. And I was like, who's going to be the first to generate an article? Because that could unleash the floodgates. If the Washington Post just came out and started an AI generated newsletter, then it opens the door for everyone. And while that hasn't happened, it's been sort of it's been incremental. And I think the Washington Post is a good example. The Washington Post, who they were at our first AI summit. Phoebe Connolly, who's oversees some editorial AI initiatives there, and they started with a lot of internal tools. One called Haystacker that helped them process thousands of videos and like classify them and figure out how they could work them into stories. And then they transitioned into public facing, which the big thing was this bot that would answer questions about climate. And it was based on Washington Post climate reporting. And it was really cool. And then they kind of like went all in. Like after there's some changes there, it seemed like AI was like really a priority. And so they transformed their search. So now if you like search the Washington Post website, like you get an AI answer. And so they're an interesting example, and they're really experimenting, and they get a lot of blowback. I will say, and there are certain things that I think they could do better. But I do have a lot of respect for like the news organizations that are trying to push the envelope a little bit. And like the New York Times, they have done a ton of stuff internally with AI. They built out a really great AI team. So the floodgates I don't think have been opened where like you're going to open the New York Times homepage and half the articles are written with AI. But I think there's enough experimentation that audiences are starting to see it in places that they didn't see it in the big guys' papers before.
Right. To sort of close this up now, Alex, like things are going to obviously change a great deal here in the next year, 2, 3 years. Are you excited about the possibilities? Are you scared as hell about the possibilities? Like, so where you study this so much, where do you stand on the future? Is it something that we should be really embracing, or should we be really wary of it?
We've got to embrace it. I'm not going to straddle the fence. I think I'm not going to straddle the fence and say there's the good, the bad. There is the good and the bad. But I'll just say I'm all in. I see a lot of promise in AI. I mean, I think it can help us personalize videos, vertical video, newsletters for people. It can help turn, like I said, anyone into a data journalist. It can turn anyone into a coder. It can help us reach new communities. We saw over the last however many years, bureaus in rural areas are closing, everywhere. Newspapers are not covering communities that they used to cover. AI can help do that. They can hold the powerful to account. And then looking into like the way future, I brought this up at the Global Fact, the International Fact Checking Network's conference last year. We're not that far off. Like fact checkers, it was a conference of fact checkers. And the big challenge is always like, who's going to read a fact check? Like we want everyone to read fact checks, and Facebook has done away with fact checks. But like, what if we could personalize fact checks to engage like Gen Z? Like, what if there was a way to that like automatically any fact check that you do is turned into a TikTok video? What if it's turned into a TikTok video featuring Mr. Beast explaining why, what is happening in schools? The litter boxes in schools is actually misinformation. So I see so much promise in these tools, and I think I'm really privileged in the fact that I get to work on the ethics side at Poynter, so I can feel comfortable about that because I know Poynter is there and providing that ethics training and helping people experiment responsibly, so we can see that positive view of the future.
Well, you have to keep coming back to this podcast to fill me in on everything that's going on. So
yeah, it's hard to predict the future with this. So everything I just said could be complete BS. And this entire thing could be complete BS.
This might not even be real. Are you real? Are we real?
Who knows? Who knows? But I appreciate having this. The thing that has changed, and I'll end with this, is During the big rise of social media, when we were kind of caught on our heels and the platforms took a lot of our traffic and they were really calling the shots, these types of conversations weren't happening. And the conversations about AI in journalism are happening every day. There's a conference every other week. There are sessions at every conference. We're talking right now. There are conversations in every newsroom. So that's the other thing that's really encouraging is we're talking about it.
Right. Good stuff. Alex Mahadevan, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, if you enjoyed this podcast, go back, check out some of our past episodes. We had MSNBC's Jen Psaki on here. We recently had Angela Fu, my colleague from Poynter, who's covering the attacks on press freedom. Many others. Again, if you like what you hear, give us a good rating on Apple and Spotify. If you're watching us on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to our podcast. It really helps out a bunch, allows us to keep bringing you these really important and entertaining conversations. Thanks again. We'll talk to you next time on the Poynter Report Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Poynter Report Podcast. The podcast is produced by the Department of Journalism and Digital Communication at the University of South Florida, St. Petersburg. Executive producers are Elliot Weiser and Ren LaForme. Producer is Tom Jones, and our director is Christopher Campbell. And a special thank you to Neil Brown and Dr. Mark Walters.